Welcome back, Cloudwolf here, and today we have a dungeon generator that kind of builds a dungeon like jigsaw blocks in a sort of tree pattern. So the way it works is it basically starts at a center point, and from that center point it places rooms at each of the connecting doorways, going on and on until it can no longer place anything anymore. In this example, the starting room has 4 different connections it can make, and so at all these 4 connections in some random order, it will decide to try to place a room. Now at the start, it is able to place pretty much anything because there is a lot of space. And so it'll place a room that has a connecting doorway that it can connect to. But when you come to a door like this, you have a problem because on the left, we place something. So what we can place is actually limited based on what we placed before, which is why we visit the doors in a random manner. And so this one is not able to place anything because I don't have any rooms that would fit or could fit hypothetically. And so we kind of just keep placing these over and over in a tree-like fashion. In this case, it could not place anything here. But it just expands into a ginormous nest of rooms for a dungeon. Now, one potential issue that I will note about this is that when you are on any given branch or root of the tree, you cannot cross over to another root of the tree. And that's just something that you can mess around with. I'm going to be giving the world download and the Datapack download to you guys in the GitHub linked in the description for you to play around with. But this kind of gives you the basics of dungeon generation of this type. And so if you wanted to do a dungeon that was highly grid-based, and you could ensure certain rules, such as doors are always touching each other, you could actually have certain rooms, or roots as I call them, link back to each other. So what I mean by that is you can see that this section over here will never touch this section over here because they were built on a different kind of route. They are not connected. They may connect at some point, probably not though, going all the way back to the start. And so it would make a little bit of logical sense to make a connection here, but it can't because it doesn't know how to do that. Now, of course, obviously we are able to just walk out the door, but that's because I didn't add any code that actually blocks doors that go to nowhere. And that again is an implementation thing that you can do. So some of the initial settings that you can use inside this, and I encourage you to download the world download so you can play around with the demo. But some of the different settings you can use is max depth, which says how deep it will go if possible. And so when I set it to 15, that means from the starting room, it will try and place 15 rooms in a line, but it has to build out from the center to make it fair. So you don't just have one long line and then the rest it can't place because there's no room. And so it kind of builds it out starting from the center in rings. And then the next setting you can do is doors per, which by default is set to 30. That's basically as fast as I am willing to make it go. Sometimes the commands cost more, sometimes they cost less. If you set it to 30 doors per iteration, it will basically cap out the commands just below the max command limit. And so you can build a very large dungeon very, very quickly. I initially set it to just 1 for animation purposes, just so I can explain things and have it in the background. But it looks like this. The next setting is Dynaclear, which by default is on because I assume you probably want it. But what Dynaclear does is for any dungeon that you build with a specified level value, it will clear the previous one by using markers for each room to save where that room was. It's a little expensive because you end up with quite a few marker entities spawned because you have 1 marker per room that is used to do that, but you're able to remove the previous work like that. The next setting is seated, and what seated lets you do is it uses a little bit more commands, actually a lot more commands per room placement to basically be able to reconstruct the previous dungeon that you built. This is nice for debugging to see like maybe there's a problem with the data pack or maybe there's a problem with your rooms that you placed. And so if you run this command, which copies the previous seed onto the new seed, and then you run it again, you will notice that it generated the exact same build. You can go back in the video and see to ensure that they are the same, but it should be exactly the same. And then finally, the last notable setting is .level. .level basically specifies what level you're building. So if I change .level to 1, it will try to build the dungeon with the ID of 1, but I don't have any builds inside that level value, so it won't do anything in this case, so there's no reason for me to show it. But it essentially lets you have different pools of rooms to choose from, so you can build different dungeons and have multiple at once. Of course, we don't really support having multiple of the same level, but we support multiple levels. So if you want to actually build the dungeon, you specify where it's going to start, and then you run build start with the correct build settings. So if you want to clear the dungeon, do /function s build /dynaclear/start. And if you run that, it will clear all the dungeon except for the root. And that's kind of my bad. I don't have a way to clear the root, but you can implement that yourself or just leave it, because though in my design, the root will not really move for what this is used for. So when you join the world, this is what you are going to open it up to. And what I intend you to check out is /function s build /demo, which lets you build a demo dungeon, and demo last, which lets you build the previous demo dungeon. And demo last is just the seed thing, and demo is just building a dungeon. Now you can play around with this dungeon. These are the rooms that are used or accessible from the dungeon, and there are a lot of different settings for these rooms. We'll cover how to make a room very quickly here. So when you're making a room for the dungeon, it has to follow 3 main rules. Rule number 1, the dimensions in any direction needs to be equal to or greater than 4. And so the smallest possible room you can make is a 4x4x4, but the thinnest possible room you can make is any dimensions in any directions, and the last dimension being 4. And so just make sure that you are greater than 4 in any of the dimensions x, y, or z. The second rule is that you are only allowed to use rectangular volumes that fit in structure blocks. So you're not allowed to make something where a door is on some interior face like this, otherwise it could accidentally overwrite itself. Now, maybe you are fine with that happening, but in general use cases, you probably are not. And as an addition to that second rule, since it has to fit in a structure block, the max size is actually 32x32x32, which I know structure blocks are now 48x48x48, but I kind of just only implemented it to work with 32x32x32 for the time being. I might expand it to the 48 cubed if needed. It's possible. But we would have to change some of the rules, such as if you're working with 48 cubed, then you're limited to 6x6x6 as your smallest size. And the final rule is that doors, you really only want to place 1 door on each of the faces. I don't really know what happens when you place 2. Probably not good things. Probably only one of those 2 doors will actually be able to connect at any given time. And it must be on the actual faces of the structure like this. And so to actually build this room and add it to the pool of rooms, what we're going to do is we're going to get the place door command, which will just be in your inventory when you join this world, but all it does is it runs /function s editor place door. It runs this with automatically needs redstone on. And so when we right click it and face the direction of the door, it will say south because we are facing south. So make sure that it matches up with the direction you're facing from the inside of the room. And same with this one, west, north, east. Now let's say we accidentally place this one as south, then make sure that you run the delete, which just runs /function s editor /place /delete, which will delete any of these extra entities, including the door. The next thing you need to do is place a structure block and make the structure block say the correct dimensions here and give it a special name and a special folder or location. You're allowed to do whatever you want in terms of that. And so also include entities, click done. Now fly backwards and make sure that there's no armor stands because those are just for visual purposes and debugging. Then click save, and now you've saved the room. The last thing you need to do is add something that can indicate whether the rules of this room and whether we should place it. And to use that, we use a marker, and the marker is placed using /function s editor place room. Except for this one, you really want to use a command block that runs the function so that you can rename the room to what you want it to be named. And so place the command block in here, name it something like tutorial, copy it here, and now place it on top of this block. Now once it's on top of this block, you get this little comparator, which I just used as a right-click detection method for fun. And so you right-click it and it will tell you the information about the room that you're editing. And so as long as you're close to this marker, everything will work for this room, and you have a variety of different settings to choose from. So level lets you specify basically what pool it is in, and so we only have one pool, so we'll leave it at level 0. Weight specifies the weight of the item, similar to how loot tables work. So if the room is something that could fit in a place, then the weight will impact how likely it is that that room is placed in. So if I set this thing to a weight of like 10, then we're going to see tons of these rooms everywhere. Now, next we basically have max. So this is how many of the room you're allowed to place. Let's say you have a boss room or some kind of loot room. You would want to say, oh, only one boss room. Or maybe you want to say 3 or 4 chest rooms. If you leave it at 0, it won't place any. This is a good way to toggle whether a room is in your dungeon or not. And then finally, -1 means it will place as many as it can. The last setting is minimum depth, which is how far from the start it starts placing. And so 0 means it can place from the very first starting room. 1 means it waits 1 room before it places it, and so on and so forth, or before it's possible to place it. Then measure room is one you always have to do for every room before it is usable. And what this does is it goes to all the doors, or it tries to find all the doors inside the dimensions of the structure block that is specified below it, that basically calculate the directions of until you hit air on the doors. And so if we go to north door, the way you read this is left, right, up, down. So you face the door like you should, and then the first coordinate is how many blocks to the left it has, so 1. The second is how many blocks to the right it has, so 3. The third is how many blocks up it has, so 1, 2. And the fourth is how many blocks down it has, so 1. Now, if any of these measurements say 999, that means that it is not an actual door. So let's go ahead and hit the delete on this and hit remeasure, and you'll just see 9999999. That's just a default debugging thing, but that means that there isn't a door for that direction. You can just use that to make sure that it has the proper doors, because if you place these rooms too close to each other or in certain configurations where they line up just perfectly, then when you calculate the measure, it may pick up a door from a different room on accident. It's possible. And finally, to actually make this thing accessible, go into the Datapack, go into the Dungeons folder. This is where you'll be manipulating most of the code when you're actually making these pools. And so you can see that if level is 0, then run this function. And in this function, it says if level is 0, run this function. If you wanted to add more levels, you actually have to manually do this. So if level is 1, then run into a different folder from demo, like my dungeon. Okay. And then inside here, demo, which you can copy this folder if you want to make your own dungeon. You can go to names, and names basically link the name of the marker with the place function command, the place command. And so the name of the marker was named tutorial, and the name of the structure is tutorial. Keep in mind that structures can not be saved with capital letters, and that's why some of these I used capital letters for the name and they don't match up in the function, but that's okay. And then finally, root is the room that is placed at the very start. I kind of left this, it's kind of overstated, but I left it ambiguous so that you can do other things at the root if you want to. Now, if I type /reload and I go ahead and run, not demo last, but also demo last, if you change it will not work properly if you actually change the pool, because it's based on this, all the conditions have to be the same for it to properly use the previous seed. If you change conditions, it will not be able to build the last dungeon. And so if I run it, you'll see that we are going to get a lot of these green rooms because I have a weight of 10 on it. And so we're just going to get a whole lot of them. The last thing to note, because I'm trying to be concise here, is places where you might want to change some stuff. And so obviously you probably, when you go to a room and you aren't able to place something here or nothing gets placed here, you would like to just do something, right? You want to close this off so that I can't accidentally jump off the map. Well, I didn't specify that because it's a little bit arbitrary what you actually want to do there, whether you want to fill it with dirt or I don't know. Maybe I'll come up with a good idea later, or you guys will give me a suggestion, but I left it ambiguous. And so the place where you actually can do that is there might be a function at door called, actually, let's just add a function at door called, let me change this. I'm sorry, I'm editing the pack as I go. And we will say happens if a room is not placed. Okay. And then inside start, you can see all these comments I gave, but we'll just here and do build/door/dead end. Okay. Build/door/dead end. And if placed is 0. So that's just a flag I use to determine what happens. And so I also have an extra flag for tunnels, which I don't want you to use because I wanted to make a tunneling method, but I did not actually get into implementing it. So anyways, if you want to do something at these doors, you can do something like set block stone, and that will just set a block to stone. And so if I run this demo, any doors it cannot place at, it will set to stone. But again, we probably will not have that happen. So let's do scoreboard players set.max depth dg.build 30, and maybe we'll have that happen. Yep, and here we have some stone. All right, cool. So yeah, it happens a lot because this room is kind of funny. But yeah, that's how you can make something happen when there's no room that is able to be placed. If you want more details on how this actually works, I suggest just reading the pack, and I might give a little better explanation on the GitHub page. If you guys thought this was useful and want to see more, let me know in the comments below. Leave a like, and I will see you guys next time. Peace.